Welcome in, everybody, to another One Piece video. Today, we're here to talk about the legendary drop of chapter 1180. And all I gotta say is that this is exactly what most people wanted from Imu. They showed up last chapter with so much cachet that it would be insane if they did not do at least this much damage. But before I get too ahead of myself, you know exactly how we like to tackle these chapters chronologically. So that does mean we have to talk about that reader request in the cover yet again, and it is Zeus making it rain candy on Vegapunk, Nami, and Chopper. I will admit, I kind of enjoyed this one. I thought it was a lot of fun. I also like that you can see that Zeus is coming out of a candy machine. He's not just doing this naturally. No, Vegapunk is helping him in this process. So now, with that being said, all that's left is to ask whether or not this cover page actually means anything deeper. Is this potentially foreshadowing some major future event in the story? I don't really think so. I think it's really just a reader request that is here for fun. It's a very different tone than the rest of the chapter, right? You see Zeus over here dropping candy, and then you go to the chapter and Imu is dropping bodies. So, getting into the first page of the chapter now, we get a full shot of what Imu NERONA actually looks like. Last week we did get an up-close shot, but the far-away full-body shot, it was so far that we couldn't really make out many of his intricate details. Here, we see that he doesn't just have dots on his face and his neck, he actually has dots all over his freaking body. It does change into lines when it hits the forearm, and then of course, he does have eyes on the back of both of his hands. Last week, we saw that he had it on one hand, but now we get confirmation that both hands are actually sporting the eyes. I am wondering if the tattoos actually mean anything. I think they do. I think they will be related to some sort of power. That's just a guess. I do go back to when Imu-Gunko stopped Brook dead in his tracks without utilizing Gunko's arrow ability. I think that is linked to the eyes on his hands. But, again, that is just speculation. Also, one thing I found really funny about Imu's design was Oda's choice of giving Imu all those white dots across his body, because it just reminds me of Cell and how Toriyama and the Dragon Ball Z animators talked about how animating and drawing Cell was a huge pain in the ass because of all of his spots. I like to imagine when animators see Imu's design here, they're gonna be whinging in pain because I bet it'll be that damn tough to actually keep up with. So the next thing I found kind of interesting about his design are the skulls that are floating around his waist. Of course, we saw the skulls last week, but here, when we see them in more detail, you can actually tell that they're all lobotomized to an extent, right? All these skulls were cracked at the top, so it looks like somebody went in, removed the brain, and then stitched it back together. What is up with that? It's really hard to tell, because for a lot of One Piece characters, sometimes their costumes don't really mean anything, but sometimes it does hold a lot of lore. So I am curious to see if this actually will come into play at some point in time with Imu's backstory. Like maybe the skulls are fellow demon Nakama. Maybe they're the skulls of past opponents even. Outside of that, the next thing to talk about is his actual fit. Somebody mentioned it last week and I did kind of see it, but I was like, okay, maybe there's more to it when we get up close, but it does look like an Elbaf outfit. Does he always look like this, or did he simply put this on because he knows he's coming to the land of giants? I do wonder, right? Because the stripes on his pants, it's very reminiscent to the stripes on Usopp's pants, and then of course that waist is the same waist we see with Jinbei and Frankie, and it's like, okay, what is going on here, man? It does look like he dressed up for the occasion. So now, getting on to the events of the chapter, he is still posed up on top of the Elbaf Tower, and that is when he instantly comes down to the Western Village. It's pretty crazy. He actually moves so fast that when you see that panel of him dropping to the village, his flame cloud is still back there. He is moving faster than his clouds can even keep up. He says, hey, who is the king here in Elbaf? Where are they? Dory and Brogy say, we have no idea what the hell you're talking about. We have no king here. And this is very interesting because Imu should know that there's no king in Elbaf. The last king was King Harold. And plus, he was here in Gunko's body. He should know that the throne in Elbaf is currently vacant. So this dialogue really struck me as odd. But one thing I do go back to is when Imu initially Domi reversied Dory and Brogy. When he Domi reversied them, he told them to go off and kill Yarl. And then after he kills Yarl, he wanted Dory and Brogy to proclaim themselves as the kings of Elbaf. So maybe this is a roundabout way of Imu asking, who the hell are you guys? How did you get undomified? So that right there could be the answer, but I'm not too sure. He could even be referring to Yarl, since of course he wanted Dory and Brogy to kill Yarl and then proclaim themselves as king. But Yarl isn't seen as a king, he's just an elder in the village. So I'm not too sure what Imu is getting at here. This could just be his catchphrase though, right? You know, he shows up on an island, he says, hey, where's the king? Where is the head honcho? After Dory and Brogy answer Imu, he does turn his attention to his buddy Saint Sommers. Sommers says, boss, chief, over here. Imu then instantly goes over and frees him. And it is absolutely insane how fast Imu is working. Dude, Imu is moving so quickly that Gerd didn't even register. Better fingers just got sliced off. Imu did this, of course, to free Saint Sommers, and the Giants, after seeing this, go into a rampage. Zoro, Hireden, Stanson, everybody is absolutely shocked. They're asking who the hell this guy even is, and that is when Hireden goes in to attack the Demon King. Stanson says, hey, Hireden, wait, we don't even know what the hell this guy is. And we see that Stanson kicks his captain to the side because he knows that something bad is going to happen. And something bad did happen because Stanson then ends up losing his leg. Dude, Imu is going around collecting body parts, brother. And this right here is exactly what we wanted, boy. Tension, stakes, loss. Imu is bringing it all back to the battlefield, man. So, of course, because this is all happening, everybody is still freaking out. Chopper's saying, whoa, what the hell? Everybody's like, yo, who is this man? That is when Zoro goes in with a Rengoku Purgatory Onigiri. One of his strongest attacks. You can see that his blades are in King of Hell mode. They got the green flame around him. But Imu easily blocks one of Zoro's strongest attacks with his tail. And it's crazy. You know, Imu is aura farming in that panel. He's not even really looking at Zoro. He's looking off to the side, just blocking Zoro, man. It is crazy. And of course, after doing that, he does just throw out his hand, and he has a really interesting pose. He does this, and we see that a black flame spawns out of his palm, and it's called Demonic Aura, or Omen, or if you pronounce it as it is called Maki. Maki, Haki. It seems like this is Imu's advanced version of Haki, his demonic version of Haki. It is pretty absurd, and it packs a hell of a punch. One blow from this flame is all it took to bring Zoro down. And it's not one of those things where, oh, Zoro's getting back up, Zoro's fine. No. Zoro is seen on the ground saying, damn it. And then by the end of this whole sequence, Chopper's like, yo, get Zoro inside the building. We gotta help these guys. It is powerful. And the craziest part is that this is just Imu's introduction. I promise you, Imu has more tricks in the bag. This is his hello. So next thing we see is that Hireden tries to go in for a sneak attack while he's distracted by Zoro, but Imu quickly turns around and shoots off another Maki. This Maki is a little bit different, or should I say it's the same, but we actually get a new angle of it. But when he shoots it from his hand, the Maki flame actually gets a face, horn, and mouth. And I'm gonna be honest, it's kind of cute. You know, I do like the way it looks. And I wonder if they all have like personalities or if they can talk. I'm not too sure what's going on here, right? I mean, even when it comes to the houses and the music, all of that is still unexplained. Imu is quite literally an anomaly. So of course, this blow does land on Hiriden, and we see the aftermath. We get this massive black fire hockey explosion. Hiriden and Zoro are down for the count. Also, speaking of hand gestures, I don't know if you guys saw the new One Piece opening, but we got a brand new one, and it was super cool, dude. So while Imu's using Maki here, and that's dope, he also throws out this, I think. Yeah, he throws out this in the anime opening, and we've never seen this before, but if I had to guess what this symbolizes, this is the hoof of the Celestial Dragon. How we have the 3 points and then the point at the bottom. Yeah, I think it's pretty badass, and Imu just throws it up while sitting on the empty throne. And it's like, okay, now all we have to do is make this canon, guys. We gotta make this canon. So, now that the main threats in the Western Village have been dealt with, Imu then turns his attention to Saint Sami. He walks over to him and he grants Saint Summers the Maki ability. He grants him the Omen demonic aura. Yeah, dude, this is the God Knight buff we wanted. Of course, we don't know if this will be a legitimate power buff or not, but considering the fact that this black fire halo does persist, I do think that this is going to be an upgraded version of Saint Summers we're going to be fighting in the future. So, Saint Summers throws his hand up. He says, "Thank you for the aura, boss. Thank you for the Maki." And you see that he goes around, picks up his heart, and then they blast off. Imu simply says, "Hey, Summers, get to it. We do not have a lot of time." Summers says, "Yes, my lord." And they just bounce. It is so cool, dude. And I am excited to see what Saint Summers is capable of now. How strong is the Maki buff? Also, now that we have the debut dash reveal of the Maki demonic aura omen ability, the mural makes so much more sense because that giant figure on the left, which we assume is Imu, does seemingly have a fire-based ability coming out of the palm of their hands. I believe that if that isn't the Mother Flame, it is simply their demonic aura powers. So now that we see how versatile Imu's black flame is, you know exactly what we have to ask. It is a question-theory that everybody has been talking about for the longest time, but will Luffy's white flame hair ever reach this level? Will Luffy be able to do these exact same things? I personally think so. You know, the idea of Luffy buffing up his allies with the Drums of Liberation, with Nika's flame, that's always been in the book ever since we saw Gear 5. So now that, here in this chapter, we see that Imu can do exactly that, I do think that Luffy's white flames will be able to do it too. You know, of course, that is a leap and a jump and a hop away, but I do think it is possible. You know, it's very reminiscent of Naruto, how he went around giving all of his allies the nine-tailed cloak. I think Luffy and Imu can do the exact same thing. Hell, Imu is doing it, so, you know, he's already out of the equation. So, yes, I do imagine that Luffy will get white flame attacks, and, of course, I do think it is intentional that in Gear 5th, Luffy has not really utilized a red hawk yet, or a red rock. We're missing the Gear 5th variant, and I do personally believe that will be Luffy's next big buff. Him learning that he is the sun god, and that he can use his white fires to fight. So, one thing that's kind of interesting, I'm not too sure if this is what's happening or not, so I would love some clarification from you guys. I would love it if you guys weighed in on this. But in the page where you see St. Summers and Imu blast off into outer space, the houses on the bottom right, 1 minute, they're demonified. But then, in the very next panel, it looks like they go back to normal? I'm not too sure if they go back to normal or if those are simply different houses, but based on the framing, it looks like those houses did get undemonified. And I think that does make sense if that is what is happening, because of course, they're being fueled by Imu's drums of oppression. So now that Imu is gone from the close vicinity, the houses turn back to normal. And of course, I mean, these guys are talking about bringing Zoro and the other giants who are injured into the houses. So I don't think they do that if the houses were still, you know, bouncing around and being evil. So we see that the giants are quickly spreading the news that a new enemy has arrived. An ally to the Knights of God, one far beyond their power level, has dropped in. We see that Imu is flying using the black wings we saw last chapter, which is pretty crazy, mind you. You know, we saw him spawn in with the black wings in 1179, but then he was missing it for like, what? The end of last chapter plus the first half of this one? So it's like, yo, he can choose whether or not he wants the wings out or inside his body. That is so convenient, brother. You know, if you guys have ever played an MMO or just mini action games that do not allow clipping, it's like, dude, wings are a hassle, man. Sometimes you cannot work your way inside of buildings because they're too big, they're too broad. But for Imu, they can simply disappear if he wants them to be gone. It is absurd. Oh yeah, one last detail I forgot to mention earlier about Imu's appearance, but we actually get his size in this chapter. Of course, we saw last chapter that he might be pretty big, but it was really hard to tell because it's such a faraway shot. But here in this chapter, we can see that he is about the size of Kaido, or even Big Mom. He is smaller than a regular giant, but he is bigger than your average human. So, we see that the giants are panicking because of this news. They're like, yo, do not drop your weapons, be on guard, someone is here, man. We see that while Imu is flying to his destination, he runs into Gunko, who is trapped in a block of ice. He then points the end of his spear at Gunko, and then he shoots off another Maki attack. We see a massive explosion take place where Gunko was at, and we can all assume that Gunko is now freed. What's interesting is that Imu doesn't stick around to give Gunko Maki. He doesn't stick around to help Gunko at all. So I do think that is because he knows that she might rebel? It's hard to say. You know, last we saw, when Imu wasn't directly possessing her, she was trying to help Brook and the Straw Hats. So I do question where Gunko's loyalties will be now that she's thawed out. Will she immediately go back to being brainwashed? Or are we going to get Princess Shuri back in action? And of course, now that Shuri is out to play, I do wonder if this is when Brook and Usopp are going to wake up so that we can get some more backstory here, so that Usopp can get his big moment, and so that Brook can talk to his princess and uncover what happened the day her father died. So, next thing's next, but we see that Gaban and his group are talking about this crazy hockey. And Gaban comments and says that this hockey is so immense and it is something that he didn't even witness at God Valley. And I think this is important because there was a lot of questions in the air like, oh, did the Roger Pirates ever fight Imu directly? Did Roger ever see this form? And now I think the answer is leading towards no. The Roger Pirates never really fought this version of Imu. When they fought him, he was simply a black blob. And I've seen a lot of people wondering, like, what the hell were those silhouettes, right? The silhouette when he fought Sabo, like, what is that thing coming down? Was that even Imu? I do think that was Imu, and I think that might have just been a different transformation. I think what we're seeing in this chapter is just one version. This is his hybrid Zoan transformation kind of thing, and what we saw when he was attacking Sabo must have been a bigger Zoan form. That is my take right now. We cut on over to Luffy and Loki. They're trying to scarf down the food as fast as they can because they know that somebody crazy has just landed. And that is when we immediately cut on over to the next group, which is Nami, Sanji, Jinbei, Brook, Usopp, and Frankie. And Imu lands nearby them. Jinbei says, wait, is his target? And yes, we see that Imu's target all along. The reason why he came to the Owl Library was to save Killingham. Killingham, smiling from ear to ear, says, boss! We see that Killingham does get the Maki. His body reattaches. And oh my god, dude. I am super effing excited to see how he performs next chapter. Of course, Sanji, Jinbei, Frankie, they dealt with Killingham with ease. But now that he's been buffed up, what's it going to be like now? It's like what Killingham said earlier. Underestimate us while you can, maggots. He's back in action. And he got the demonic aura Omen Maki buff. How strong will this make him? And of course, it's funny, you know, going back to when he got off-screened. One big hope that I had was that the reason Oda off-screened him, one, it's because he didn't really stand a chance, but two, it's because Oda didn't want to repeat a fight twice. Because there was going to be a round 2, and Oda just wanted to save all the good stuff for that second bout. Sanji rushes in to stop Imu, saying, hey, what the hell are you doing? Why are you freeing him? Of course, Imu simply blocks the attack with the bottom of his foot. He spins and he kicks Sanji with a Maki Haki infused leg. Sanji, dude, look at the panel of Sanji freaking out because of this attack. It is absurd. You know, Oda shaded in Sanji's eyes like he's about to die. One thing about Sanji is that surprisingly, he's not in Ifrit Janbei Germa mode because his eyebrows are still normal. So this isn't even like Germa Sanji, right? And the thing is with Sanji and Zoro in this chapter, yeah, they got blitzed, they got one shot, but they weren't prepared for this, right? Zoro wasn't prepared to fight Imu all of a sudden. Sanji doesn't even know what the hell is happening. Yeah, our boys are getting slapped by an unknown force. And it's pretty funny too, seeing all the slanderous names that are coming out of this chapter. People are calling Zoro not the king of hell, but the citizen of hell, the commoner of hell. And then for Sanji, instead of calling him Mr. Prince, they're calling him Mr. Commoner. It is absurd. Of course, it's all in good fun. You know, it's not like super serious. I mean, everybody would lose to Imu. You know, whenever people slander characters, I view it as a funny time. So, as far as how I feel about the Straw Hats losing left and right here in Elbaf, I love it. I love that we finally have a villain worth their salt. We finally have a villain to be proud of. We're seeing powers, abilities that we have never seen before in One Piece, bringing out a new form of Haki entirely. Imu, like I said, he hasn't whipped out any more abilities other than this. We know he has a demonic grimoire book in which he can spawn anything out of. That's still a thing. He hasn't brought it out yet. It feels like Imu loves spamming one ability until it doesn't work anymore. At first, it was Domi Reversi, right? Oh, Domi Reversi, Domi Reversi, Domi Reversi. Oh, it doesn't work? Okay, I'm coming there in person. Maki, 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 Maki. So it's like, yo, we need to push Imu to the next level. I want to see what else he has in his bag. And with that being said, I think the Straw Hats, because they're losing here, because Zoro and Sanji got knocked down, they will get back up stronger. That is how I always view shonen losses. When Luffy loses, guess what happens? He gets up stronger the next time. And that applies for every single Straw Hat. So in this chapter, when I see that Zoro and Sanji have been dealt with easily, I smile. Not just because I like villains, but because I know our bullies are just gonna get more powerful the second time around. Like for Zoro, right? He still hasn't tried to master his advanced Conqueror's Haki. He needs to do that. And then for Sanji, I'd say Germa mode is still relatively new to him. And of course, we don't know how his Conqueror's Haki conversation went with Scopper Gabon. Now that Killingham is like, what? Stronger than ever. He now has an opponent to test his limits against. And same with Zoro if he fights Sommers, right? That is how I view all of this. And it's funny seeing that Sanji's being kicked by Black Flames, because for the longest time, it's still an ongoing theory, but a lot of people do believe that Sanji one day will get Black Flames to fulfill the Black Leg epithet. He got Red Flames, he got Blue Flames. What is next? Well, it might be Black Flames, which I think makes sense because it's called Maki, demonic aura, and all of Sanji's
Jambes
are devil-based. Diable Janbei, Ifrit Janbei. Maybe the next thing is NERONA Janbei or Maki Janbei, demonic Janbei. And then same for Zoro, right? In a way, Zoro might get a buff from Imu as well, because Zoro does view himself as the king of hell. Maybe seeing the real king of hell gives him inspirations for brand new attacks. Maybe the green flames on his sword turn black. You know, I do think there's a lot of good that can come from a loss. And it's really funny too, by the way, how we see that Zoro and Sanji have been dealt with in this chapter. And then on the side, you have Chopper who's just freaking out. You have Jinbei, Frankie, and Nami who are just witness Sanji get knocked back. And it's like, yo, are they gonna try their hand at Imu too? Or are they like, no, if Zoro and Sanji can't do it, we're not going to step into the ring either. At least for now, right? Unless they really have to. So, next up, we see that after Sanji gets blown to pieces, Loki arrives at the scene. That is one thing to keep in mind. All of these characters right now are relatively close. Imu, Usopp, Brook, Jinbei, Frankie, Nami, Loki, Ragnar, Luffy, they're all right here because they all just, coagulated at the Owl Library Elbaf school. So, Imu's like, hey, I'm looking for the guy that killed my servant, Harold, 14 years ago. Loki snaps back madder than ever. Oda, dude, he shaded the hell out of Loki. Loki's not having a good time now that he knows that Imu was the one who did that to his father. Loki says, well, you found him. He wasn't your servant. He was my dad, and he was the king of Elbaf. You idiot. And that is where we end the chapter, with Loki confronting the king of the world. I don't know, man. I'd like to imagine that Loki does put up a really good fight, but it's just hard to see. Imu hasn't even tried at all yet, and he dealt with our boys. I said this in the spoiler video. I'll say it again. Imu slicing off Garrett's fingers, Imu dealing with Hyruden, dealing with Stanson, that's whatever. Giants are just trash, man. They're a loser race in general if you're a top tier in One Piece. Aside from Harold and Loki, right? So yeah, Imu dealing with these giants, it's whatever. They're losers, man. Who cares? But Imu dealing with Sanji and Zoro with ease? Now that is impressive. Now that is actually crazy. So Loki versus Imu. I just feel like Imu won't lose, man. I can't imagine Imu really stressing about this situation. Unless Luffy jumps in too and it's like a 2v1 or 3v1 if you consider Ragnar a competitor. It's I just feel like Imu's gonna wipe him. It's tough. And we gotta remember that Loki is still injured. Shamrock did stab him with a Cerberus blade. Gunko kicked him around. Dude, Garrett said that it would take 6 months for Loki to heal properly. And what did he do? He immediately went up to the Sun Realm. He fought the nightmare monsters. He's a little bit winded. He just got done eating food. This isn't Loki at full capacity. And even if Luffy joins in, he's also winded. But I guess you could also argue that Imu is winded as well, because he did cough up blood when he came to Elbaf, which is what I think will be our saving grace. Because when Imu talked to St. Somers earlier, he did say that we need to hurry up. We gotta finish this up quick. Imu knows they cannot stay here forever. And I think that is why he's sending out so many Makis, because it's efficient. It's an easy one-hit kill. So yeah, man, while I do think that Loki will look phenomenal next chapter, I just can't imagine Imu taking any real damage. He might get a couple of good hits in, maybe we get some blood from Imu if, Loki and Luffy work together, but I don't think he's losing, brother. I think he's gonna stomp. One thing I do really hope for is that I hope this turns into somewhat of a prolonged battle, because I want to see hybrid form Loki. I want Imu to spill dialogue about Nidhogg, the war god, the past of Elbaf. Hell, when Luffy joins in, maybe we hear about Joy Boy or Nika's powers. I do think that Imu, if they are talkative, can give us so much information. So now, last thing I do want to bring up, but St. Somers and Killingham. Who are they going to fight? St. Somers, he bounced out of the village. I'm assuming he's going to kidnap the kids? No, that can't be the case, right? Because the kids are in the Western Village. So if the goal was to still kidnap the kids, Somers wouldn't bounce away. Unless they're nearby and it is a jump away. I'm not too sure. We don't have a big image of Elbaf. But it looks like they might be doing something else now. We know that their goal is to subjugate Elbaf, so I do think the kids might still be the prerogative, but we'll see. And then with Killingham, what is he going to do now that he's back in action? I mean, is he going to fight Jinbei and Frankie? That'd be kind of crazy, right? Jinbei, Frankie, Nami, all of them throw their hands against killing him. Maybe he goes back to destroying the library. Maybe he starts spawning nightmare monsters again, which would be crazy, mind you. You know, we just dealt with the nightmare monsters. If killing him brings them back right away, that would be absurd. But I guess we will see next week. This chapter was really good, man. I enjoyed it. As a villain enjoyer myself, I thought this was a phenomenal 10 out of 10 chapter. Exactly what we wanted. And now I'm just questioning what the future holds. And also, how the hell is Usopp gonna stand up to Imu, man? You know, because I do think, as crazy as it sounds, I do think that Usopp and Hirden will have very big, impactful moments against Imu. Hirden, because he's Loki's brother, and because he also wants to avenge King Harold, I think he will come back into play. And then Usopp, mainly because I do view this still as Usopp's arc. As crazy as that sounds, I am an Usopp believer despite being an Usopp hater. And when it comes to Usopp, one thing I always love to bring up, and of course this could just mean absolutely nothing because it was so long ago and Oda probably forgot, but one of Usopp's first titles, one of the first things he ever calls himself back in Arlong Park was the King of Demons. He called himself Mao, the King of Devils, man. And it's like, yo, like, will that actually matter? You know, people were saying, oh, you know, Zoro's the King of Hell. He didn't stand a chance against the real King of Hell. Maybe he had the wrong title, you know? Maybe Usopp will be able to do something because he's the Devil King. We'll see. Like I said, that was so long ago, I feel like Oda might have just forgot about that. But if that does turn out to be foreshadowing, if he brings it up again, that'd be nuts. But yeah, that is it for today, guys. Let me know your thoughts on this chapter down below. Pretty short video this time around, but that's mainly because it's a very straightforward chapter. It's essentially just Imu walking around, dropping Makis, and like I said, it is a good time. Of course, in the next couple of days, we will be back with a comment read-through video. So if you want your comment read, make sure to drop it down there. And that's pretty much it. Thank you guys so much for watching all the way to the end. I really freaking appreciate it. And I'll catch you guys next week. Peace out. And stay safe, brothers. Also, quick plug, but if you have the time, please check out my channels here on the side. I got Syvduck, SYVDUCK. I talk about random movies, TV shows. I also play a lot of horror games over there, so if you're interested in that, make sure to check that out. And of course, I do have an anime reaction channel up here called Somnus Reacts, where I'm reacting to One Piece, the Elbaf arc, and Re:Zero currently. So if you're interested in that, please go to those channels and give them a good old follow. And yeah, now you've hit the end of the video.